The sultry nightmare was in the past. He had been an animal, blistered and sweating, in the heat and pain of war. He turned now, with a lover's thirst, to images of tranquil skies, fresh meadows, cool brooks, an existence of soft and eternal peace. Over the river a golden ray of sun came through the hosts of leaden rain clouds. And thus concludes The Red Badge of Courage by Stephen Crane. You guys again. All of you. Shh, the baby's trying to sleep. Welcome, I guess, to the Tonto's Demise, Week 11 recap. Shh. Welcome to the sultry sounds of the Week 11 recap. We got the lights turned down. We're going to try to keep it nice and calm and soothing for the baby. FN 2187. All right, everyone. We are checking my clock here on the watch. Just about finished with the Monday night games. Every matchup was resolved, the final determined before Monday night, Sunday night, except perhaps one matchup, that is Yinzer Jags versus CMC Music Factory. But unfortunately for CMC Music Factory, he needed Mike Evans to cover about a 21 or 22 point difference. What I'm saying actually is he had to outscore the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense by at least 20 or 22 points, all by himself. And I'm afraid that that doesn't look like it's going to happen. I'm sorry, Justin. I'm sorry. Anyway, let's get into the matchups from Week 11. First off, as usual, we will start with the defending champion, Springfield Isotopes, going up against From Gags to Riches. Unfortunately, it was neglected to be mentioned in the podcast, that this was a Tonto Bowl 18 rematch. Nobody wanted to mention that. And we all know how that went last time, don't we, Gags? We do, don't we? This time, we have the Springfield Isotopes once again, despite neglecting to put together an epic rap, pre-game rap for you. The Isotopes are once again clobbering the crap out of From Gags to Riches. No 6 touchdowns from anybody this week, but almost a 90-point lead. More than a 90-point lead currently for the Springfield Isotopes. Let me check as we stand. 2 minutes left in the Giants. Almost said Patriots because I'm thinking of Tom Brady. But no, it is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. 2 minutes left in that game. So we can pretty much say that all of the matchups are final. For some reason, these scores are not changing. So currently, the Springfield Isotopes have 189.95. From Gags to Riches currently has 97.45. Let's take a look at these matchups. the Springfield Isotopes, Kirk Cousins, in the finally reaching the matchup that was intended behind the Matt Ryan Kirk Cousins trade. Kirk Cousins in this one goes for 55.5 points. Wide receivers Devontae Adams, Deontay Johnson, and T. Higgins. 30.5. Adams pops off this week. Deontay, 23. Higgins, only 3.5. Running backs, Mark Ingram filling in for an injured Alvin Kamara. Alvin Kamara, a year later, once again affecting the outcome of a Gags versus Topes matchup by not playing this week. 15.5 points for Ingram. Miles Sanders comes back to 7.5 points. Gesicki with an even 10. Dalton Schultz in the flex with 11.5 points. Nick Folk on Thursday night in the Patriots shutout of the Atlanta Falcons. He kicks a whole bunch of field goals, scores just over 16 points. So the Isotopes kicker only scored approximately 4 points less than From Gags to Riches quarterback. An unlucky sign. A dark cloud hanging over From Gags to Riches throughout the weekend. An ominous sign after Thursday night of bad things to come. Finally, we have the Miami Dolphins defense. Struggled, surprisingly, a little bit against Joe Flacco and the New York Jets, but still managed to score about 20 points approximately. Enough to push 190 and get past From Gags to Riches, who I see the game is now final. So Gags will not be able to clear 100 points this week. I believe that makes him the first team in the league this year unable to break the 100-point barrier. Thanks to Matt Ryan. Everything has come together. Let's take a look at From Gags to Riches. All right, now these scores should be correct in the matchup page and not just on the main Yahoo page. Matt Ryan, as previously mentioned, only 4 points higher than the Springfield Isotopes kicker at 20.5 points. His wide receivers, Gags to Riches, has A.J. Brown, Jalen Waddle, and D.K. Metcalf. A.J. Brown suffers multiple injuries in this game, but goes back in the first time. Don't know if he came back the second time. Gets you just under 10 points. Waddle goes for 20.5. Metcalf, surprisingly, with the struggles of Russell Wilson upon his return, we are seeing he's made a ripple effect from Russell Wilson to DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. Only 7 points this week from DK Metcalf. James Robinson and Ernest Johnson. Wasn't sure if it was Duke Johnson or David Johnson. No, it was Ernest Johnson. Even though Chubb was back this week, Robinson got a late garbage time touchdown to get you nearly 12 points, but Johnson only 2.5. Much like your regular Johnson, only 2.5, or so I hear, according to Yahoo. I just go by what Yahoo says, that Gags has a 2.6 Johnson. Anyway, Uzomah, your tight end that you traded for recently, only gets you 3 points. Perhaps you should have held on to Gronkowski, because I think he did much better this week. Kadarius Toney, one of your Giants wide receivers in the flex, going here on Monday night. He scored you 11 points Unfortunately, he needed to score you 111 points to have pulled out a victory in this one. He was not able to do it, sad to say. Butker, your kicker from Kansas City, goes for about 8 points. And then, surprisingly, your Buffalo Bills defense gets absolutely trounced single-handedly by Jonathan Taylor. The scary Jonathan Taylor. The Buffalo Bills defense, Yahoo says 3, but you can thank Carson Wentz for his low passing yard total and taking you from -3 back to 3 into positive territory. So, 20 points from Matt Ryan, 20 points from Jalen Waddle, and single digits pretty much the rest of the way down. In Gags' time of need, his team fails him against the Isotopes once again. And Gags from Riches is going to fall to 3 and 8. Shh. Unfortunately for Gags to Riches, 3 and 8 means your best possible record is going to be 6 and 8, and that is not going to make the playoffs. I'm fairly certain that is not going to be good enough. So Gags, here we are with 3 weeks left in the regular season, and you are one of the contenders for the Tonto Bowl last year is now eliminated from playoff contention and looking to play spoiler for whoever he goes up against in the next few weeks. While the Springfield Isotopes will move up to 6 and 5 and I believe remain in 5th place where they've been for the past couple of weeks. All right, what is next down the line? All right, the matchup that was decided here on Monday night. As I said, Yinzer Jags versus CMC Music Factory, a Cougar battle. And this one was taken down by Yinzer Jags. If things did not change, Yinzer Jags' actual score should be approximately 210, while CMC Music Factory 179.65. Again, it was Mike Evans versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense, and Mike Evans needed to outscore them by approximately 20 or so points. While Mike Evans did put up 20 points by himself, unfortunately, it looks as if Tampa Bay's defense scored nearly 30 points themselves and put Yinzer Jags over the 200-point barrier this week. One of several teams to finally get us over the 200-point barrier. The first time in quite a while that multiple teams have gone over the 200-point barrier. And this will move CMC Music Factory to 4 and 7, which means his best possible record is going to be 7 and 7. Much like his favorite drink, 7 and 7. We all know that's not true. But anyway, so yes, your best record is now going to be 500 if you can win out, and you are still clinging to hope for your playoff chances. However, things are not looking very good at this point. Yinzer Jags said his final score looks like it's going to be approximately 210. Josh Allen, only 37 points, 37 and a half points. 37 and a quarter, I should say, to be accurate. His wide receivers, DJ Moore, Elijah Moore, and Traquan Smith. Is there going to be a resurrection of DJ Moore as we head down to the final stretches of the season? Thanks to the resurrection also of Cam Newton. Yet to be seen. But DJ Moore comes back with 16 points this week. Elijah Moore goes off with Flacco at quarterback for nearly 30 points. Traquan Smith, 11.5 points. The big factors here this week, one of the two guys who went crazy. Unfortunately, it was against our Pittsburgh Steelers and led to their defeat. Austin Eckler scores 4 total touchdowns. He Al Bundy's it. 4 touchdowns this week, 41.5 points, putting not only the Pittsburgh Steelers' playoff hopes into a challenging position, dire straits perhaps, but also CMC Music Factory's playoff chances into dire straits. Jeff Wilson, almost 7 points from him, filling in for the currently injured and recently acquired Elijah Mitchell, which we'll run off on a tangent real quick here. Kevin Bean, why would you waste your last transaction swapping running backs on a guy who looks like he is going to be the lead running back, barring any type of injury, in the near future, perhaps the near years of future, an undrafted player who would be a 15th round keeper next year, a potential starting running back, and you traded him for the Josh Jacobs, who gets passed around more than anybody else in this league. I don't know why you did this. So many short-term decisions you've made this year instead of looking at the big picture. And now you're fighting for your playoff life with 0 transactions and 0 trades left, with 3 weeks left still in the regular season. And that means next week you're going to have no one to start in the tight end position. Tangent over. For Yinzer Jags, George Kittle goes for 13.5 points. Another tight end, Dawson Knox, in the flex, 14 points for him. Zerline, your kicker, goes for about 10.5. And then again, on Monday night here, just finishing up, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense goes for about 30 points or so. Enough on Monday night to push Yinzer Jags over the 200-point barrier. I will go in and fix it after the recap finish here. Anyway, unfortunately for CMC Music Factory, it was not enough, despite some solid performances from his team. Ben Roethlisberger filling in, coming back from COVID, with Kyler Murray still unavailable with his injury. Roethlisberger, a valiant effort, almost 54 points from him this week. Your receivers, Mike Evans, Deontay Harris, I think is his name. Random wide receiver from the New Orleans Saints. And Mooney from Chicago. 20.5 for Evans, 23 for Mooney, and 3, unfortunately, for Harris. James Conner, once again, 21 points from him. Michael Carter, a running back from the New York Jets, 7.5 points, but unfortunately, he looks like he is going to be out for the rest of our regular season with an ankle sprain. Goddard at tight end, 11.2. CMC, your namesake, in the flex, 25 points from him this week. Bullock, your Tennessee kicker. Unfortunately, perhaps this was the biggest factor in this matchup, as Bullock, you picked him up, I believe. Who is your other kicker? You have another kicker? Yes. You're going with consistency by playing a kicker and a defense from the same team. Bullock from Tennessee and the Tennessee Titans defense. Bullock makes 1 PAT but also misses 1. No field goal attempts. Big 0 from him this week. The Tennessee Titans defense, again at home against Houston, the Texans. A money in the bank matchup going into it. And as we sit here now looking back, it was terrible. Houston defeats the Titans handily. Although Yahoo says 3, I believe the yardage actually wasn't too bad, and your score was approximately 15 from the Tennessee Titans defense. However, I think most of us, if not all of us, were expecting a much better performance from their Titans defense this week, especially with how they've performed over the past few weeks. Unfortunately, again, it was not enough from Mike Evans to get past Yinzer Jags this week. He will move up to 8-3. He will be among the cluster of 8-3 teams. While at CMC Music Factory, he will fall to 4-7 and be amongst the several 4-7s that we are going to have after the completion of this week. Next up, we have Disco versus Saquon It Ain't So. Speaking of teams moving to 8-3 or 4-7, that is what we had after this matchup, because Disco easily takes down Saquon It Ain't So. The final score here, 194.3. Unfortunately for Saquon, only 116.2. For Disco, Patrick Mahomes, 32. Tyreek Hill, 20. Chris Godwin on Monday night, and Leonard Fournette, I should say, trying to get Disco over the 200-point barrier, because this was week 11, which means knockout pool championship. Disco versus Shawshank Athletics. Had to think about it for a second there. And unfortunately, Shawshank Athletics is going to be the team who wins the knockout pool, because he was well over 200, but Disco could not quite get there on Monday night. Godwin just over 19 points. Mike Williams goes for 20.5. The biggest one here, according to Yahoo somewhere, and I guess by half-point PPR standards, this was a top 10 ever fantasy football performance put in by Jonathan Taylor this week. 56.5 points for us. 56.5. 5 total touchdowns. Al Bundy +1. Austin Eckler +1. Alex Collins picked him up because he looks like he is going to be the starting running back for the rest of the year in Seattle, thanks to Chris Carson going on season-ending injured reserve. However, any running back in Seattle this year has been nearly worthless thus far. He gets 3.5 points. Waller, 18.5. Fournette, 13.5. Prater, your kicker, approximately 4.5. And then the Carolina Panthers defense. Yahoo says 9. I actually believe you were one of the teams. We had multiple teams this week who lost points from their defense, and Carolina was one of them. I believe the actual score for Carolina Panthers defense this week was only 6. So we had to knock off a couple points for you there. But fortunately for you, it was more than enough to get past Saquon It Ain't So this week. Dak Prescott, only 30.5 points from him in what seemed like a shootout waiting to happen in Kansas City. Unfortunately, no Amari Cooper. CeeDee Lamb gets injured. The Kansas City Chiefs defense shows up, locks down Dak, locks down Zeke. 2 interceptions for him. Again, only 30.5 points. Saquon's receivers, Emmanuel Sanders, Hunter Renfrow, and Tyler Lockett. 5.5 for Sanders, 7.5 for Renfrow. Oh, maybe I'm a little bit wrong here about Russell Wilson. Tyler Lockett actually got 15.5 points, 115 yards for Tyler Lockett. Unfortunately, only 4 receptions and no touchdowns. That 115 yards must have been at least half of Russell Wilson's passing yardage. Brandon Bolden and Deontay Foreman, Saquon's 2 running backs. Never thought I would say those words, as they also did in the podcast. A combo wide starting running back combination of Brandon Bolden and Deontay Foreman. Excuse me. 3.5 points for Bolden and Foreman an even 5. Kyle Pitts, 6 points for you. Corey Davis in the flex, 6.5 points. Justin Tucker, your kicker, goes for about 11. And then the Baltimore Ravens defense. What is with everyone starting the same kicker and the same defense this year? The Ravens defense, Yahoo says 12, but I believe the final score ended up being about 24-ish. But unfortunately, it was not enough, as Disco flirted with 200 points this week, and he will move to 8-3. Unsure currently if he will remain in first place, but he will be. That is the good news. The bad news for you, unfortunately, Disco, is that you have lost the knockout pool. Made it all the way until the end, but Josh said, no, this is mine. And Saquon, it ain't so. You are going to move to 4-7. Best record you can do, again, will be 7-7, and we will see if that will be good enough for someone to get a playoff spot this year with the 7-7 record. And while we are speaking about Disco, perhaps I guess we should mention, since it was already discussed briefly in the podcast leading up to this week, and basically the argument made there is the same conclusion come to after a little bit of thought about the situation by myself, which is, Disco, you want a transaction back for picking up and dropping Donovan Peoples-Jones. However, my opinion on the matter is this, my unbiased opinion, because is nothing personal. It never is anything personal, no matter who was making this claim. You went through the process. It is at least a 3-step process to pick up a player. You did not just pick him up with a waiver claim in the middle of the night automatically by Yahoo. You went into the free agent pool. You picked Donovan Peoples-Jones. You clicked the next button. You were required to go through your lineup and choose a player to drop in place of Donovan Peoples-Jones, and you chose Terrence Marshall. Then you had to confirm that decision. And then you were taken to a third and final page, which showed the player you wanted to add and the player you wanted to drop, and you still had, yet again, to click a confirm button on this transaction, which you did. Multiple steps that you took knowingly to pick up Donovan Peoples-Jones. Unlike the Kevin Bean situation, where he put in a waiver claim for someone, Lazard from the Packers, who, unbeknownst to Kevin Bean, after making the waiver wire claim, he went on the COVID list. So there was something wrong with Alan Lazard that Kevin Bean was not aware of. There were no incidents, nothing with Donovan Peoples-Jones. So, my conclusion is you went through the entire process of scouring the free agent pool, selecting Peoples-Jones, selecting Marshall as the player to drop from your roster, and then also having to click the confirm button to complete this transaction. Thus, unless you can provide an extremely convincing argument to the group entirely that this was an accident, which is, I believe, what you claimed. Even though you dropped him almost immediately, I just cannot come to the conclusion that this was actually an accident, because you went through the entire several-step process of picking up this player. And thus, I have decided that you do not deserve the transaction back. Anyone who had done this, I think, again, I'm being unbiased, the decision would be the same, that you made this choice, stand by it, accept that you used and wasted, perhaps, that transaction. Anyway, that is my conclusion on the matter, and in the past, I think anything like that, and in the future, anything similar going forward will be concluded in a similar manner. Again, the difference between Kevin's change and your not change was that there was an injury, a COVID problem that came up, and thus I already explained as we've gone through. Anyway, so Disco, that is my decision. And once again, if you can make a valid argument that convinces the group, a majority of the group, that this decision, that transaction was a legitimate accident, which you have not convinced me of, and I don't think you ever will, based on my previous statements here in the past few minutes, we will give you that transaction back if a majority of the people want it. However, I don't believe that that is what is going to happen. Anyway, you're probably still in first place, so that is the good news. You still have several transactions left, so budget them wisely, and you are probably still in first place. What did Biscuits do? Yes, you are probably still in first place. Next up, speaking of Biscuits and porn, he was up against the aforementioned also Dub C Hooligans this week, fighting for his playoff life as well, trying to get to 6-5 and perhaps one of those final playoff spots. Unfortunately, Biscuits and Porn says no this week to the Dub C Hooligans. Back under 500 for you, he says, and he knocks you down 197.55 to 139.15. Mostly in thanks to, once again on Thursday night, an ominous result for the Dub C Hooligans, as the Biscuits and Porn defense, New England Patriots, put a 58-point smackdown on the Dub C Hooligans, meaning Tom Brady and the New England Patriots defense combining for over 110 points just by themselves, which means Biscuits needed very little else to get the victory over Dub C this week. For Biscuits and Porn, did I say the scores? 197? Yes, I did. To 139. Tom Brady, again here on Monday night. Biscuits and Porn was already in a comfortable lead with Tom Brady still left to go, and he went for 54.5 points. Biscuits receivers, Devontae Smith, CeeDee Lamb, and Chase Claypool. 10 from Smith. Lamb only 4.5 points before going out with a concussion, which is probably going to keep him out of the quick turnaround Thanksgiving game this week. So we will see what Biscuits and Porn can pull out of his porn bucket, or his biscuit bucket, his biscuit hat. for Thanksgiving Day in his wide receiver spot. Chase Claypool goes for 14.5 points. Running backs, Zeke and A.J. Dillon, 12.5, 15.5 respectively. Although Zeke, now he also has a Q next to his name with a short turnaround on Thanksgiving Thursday. Komet, a tight end from the Bears, only 2.5 points this week on one catch. Picked him up and played him over Jared Cook, who you've been playing at tight end pretty much all year long. Kind of a strange decision, I thought, but maybe you knew something that I didn't know. Turns out maybe we were both wrong, as Komet only one catch. In the flex, Carter, I don't even know his first name, from the Washington football team, a wide receiver, DeAndre Carter. He goes for just under 10 points. Boswell, your kicker from Pittsburgh, goes for about 15.5 points. A big game from him. And once again, the New England Patriots defense shuts out the Atlanta Falcons on Thursday night. A 58-point smackdown of not only the Atlanta Falcons, but the Dub C hooligans, pretty much putting this one out of reach before it even began. For Dub C hooligans, Tua goes for actually 49.5. The only long touchdown bonus this week went to him. Unfortunately, the rest of your lineup did not bring enough to get the victory here. You were missing Marquise Brown. Malcolm Brown is on IR for biscuits and porn. Hollywood Marquise Brown surprisingly went out with an injury. Amari Cooper was put on the COVID list for you this week. He's going to miss the Thanksgiving game already too, which puts you in a very difficult position in these weeks where you are must-win mode, being without two of your top wide receivers. The ones you started, Bateman from Baltimore, 6 points. Rieger from Philadelphia, despite catching a pass, despite getting 1 point from his reception, he ends up with less than 1 point because his only catch, went for -1 yards. So 0.9 from him. Other one was Jamison Crowder, a touchdown from him, 16.5 points. Pirine and Montgomery, your two running backs, 7.5 and 5 from Montgomery. 7.5 from Montgomery, I should say. And Pirine, only 5. Travis Kelce, 18.8. But the guy you traded for, again, Josh Jacobs, I guess a desperation, must-win now trade, really was not going to do much for you. This was true desperation play, as he gets 11 points for you in the flex, and you still lost by 60 points. The 60 points from the New England Patriots defense probably should have told you that this week was lost to begin with. And I really, really am surprised that you were willing to part ways with Elijah Mitchell, once again, who looks like he is going to have keeper value for at least next year. And who knows what happens from there on. As it looks more and more like Dub C hooligans, not to get ahead of ourselves, but it looks like, especially with the quick Thanksgiving turnaround and some of your players being injured and you not being able to make any transactions, and there are still bye weeks yet to come, your playoff chances are growing slimmer and slimmer by the day. Your kicker, Suckup from Tampa Bay, actually went for about 13 points. And then the Dallas Cowboys defense, a bold play at Kansas City. Yahoo says 15, and I believe that was actually the correct score because we did not have to change your score. No, actually, the score was actually only 12 because we did not have to change your score because the score was made correct thanks to the long touchdown bonus from Tua there at your quarterback. But unfortunately, Dub C, 140 points was not enough against Biscuits and Porn this week, one of the top teams in the league this year so far. He is going to move to 8-3 and be amongst that cluster of teams, while Dub C Hooligans, you are going to drop to 5-6, and I believe because of point totals, you are now going to drop out of current playoff status behind Shawshank Athletics, who is well ahead of all of us in terms of overall point totals. All right, what is next? Possum Magic versus Ed Lager. Again, a 7-3 versus a 4-6. And Possum Magic gets the victory this week as he just cracks the 200-point barrier, 200.55. For Ed Lager, 134.7. Both kickers in this matchup, -1. How unusual. That may never, ever happen again. That both kickers in the same matchup go for negative points. Anyway, for Possum Magic, he has Mac Jones, 33.5 points. His receivers, Thielen, Diggs, and McLaurin, 22, 18.5, and 21.5, respectively. Mixon, a big game for him, over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns, 27.5 points. Harris, the running back from the Patriots, 7.5 points. Gronk, 13. Chubb, over 100 yards and a touchdown for him, 25.5 points. Being carried by your by everybody this week. 20 or so points from all of your big guns, all of your wide receivers, two of your 3 running backs. But again, Koo, your kicker, -1. And then the San Francisco defense, Yahoo says 15. We must have bumped you up about, actually 16 or so, to approximately 30, 31 points from them, getting you, on Monday night, Gronk gets you just over the 200-point barrier again, and it was way more than enough to get you past Ed Lager this week, who had Saquon Barkley on Monday night. He got 11.5 points. Unfortunately, you needed him to get about 81.5 points to change the outcome of this matchup. And unfortunately, Saquon Barkley was not able to get the 80.5 points you needed this week. No Lamar Jackson because he was ill with an undisclosed illness. Garoppolo, you picked him up and played him, 33.5 points. Keenan Allen, just over 20. Brandon Cooks, only 3.5 points. And Callaway, another wide receiver from the Saints. He only catches 1 pass, but it is a 20-yard touchdown, and he gets you 9.5 points. Swift and Antonio Gibson, 25.5 from Swift, carrying his weight for you this week and most of this year. Only 7.5 points from Gibson, who has not carried his weight this year. In the tight end position, you started Arnold from the Jacksonville Jaguars. He got you 0. Again, Barkley in the flex. Excuse me. 11.5 points from him. Your kicker, also -1. It is T-Bass, kick his ass, T-Bass, from the Buffalo Bills defense. Then, the Buffalo Bills kicker, getting ahead of ourselves. Then finally, the Philadelphia Eagles defense at home against the Saints. Yahoo says 15, but I believe we bumped you up to about 24 approximately for their defense. But unfortunately, 134 was not enough this week as Pasta Magic dropped 2 hondos on you and put your, perhaps, playoff hopes to sleep. Not quite yet, as Ed Lager will drop to 4 and 7. Amongst that cluster we will discuss at the end of the matchups. And Pasta Magic will move up to 8 and 3 amongst that cluster as well. Meaning Ed Lager, your best record will be, your best possible record is going to be 7 and 7. All right, the final matchup, I believe, yes. A Cobra battle. The Shawshank Athletics versus the Hillbillies on PCP. This matchup was important for Shawshank because, once again, he was trying to win the knockout pool, and he was also trying to eliminate Brian Hillbillies on PCP from any hopes of having playoff contention by giving him loss number 8. And everything went Shawshank's way this week as he gets the victory, 215.5 versus to Hillbillies, 144.8. For Shawshank, Justin Herbert, he puts up his he goes for one of his 70-pointers against, unfortunately, our Pittsburgh Steelers. So it's either 35 or 70 for Herbert. Which one are you going to get each week? Fingers crossed you get the 35 and not the 70. Wide receivers, Pittman, Chase, and Landry. 4.5 for Pittman, 13 for Chase, and 14.5 for Landry. Although Landry looks like he suffered some sort of injury, and we will have to see on his availability for you in the weeks ahead. But that doesn't matter because you had Cooper Kupp out this week on bye. No Kupp, no problem. Still 215 points. Didn't even need the guy. Running backs, Darrell Williams and Dalvin Cook. Kind of a surprising play, seeing as you have CEH, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, on your bench, coming back from his injury, but you kept with Williams. And I see Edwards-Helaire scored 15.5 points. Williams only 3.5 points. Dalvin Cook, 22.5 points from him. Mark Andrews, 15.5. The big one here, though, was Justin Jefferson. He pops off for 2 touchdowns, 169 yards, and said 2 touchdowns there. So 110 points combined from Herbert and Jefferson this week. Carlson, your kicker, goes for about 8 points. And then the Cleveland Browns defense. Yahoo says 12. I believe we bumped that up to about another 12. So approximately 24 or so from the Cleveland Browns defense. Turning things around from last week when I believe they actually lost you points. But you still were well over 200 this week, and it was more than enough to get past the Hillbillies on PCP, who had Joe Burrow go for 30.5 points. Debo, Beasley, and Boyd, 16.5, 6.5, 12.5 respectively. Although I see Q's now next to Beasley and Boyd. Najee Harris, 17, despite taking, did you see that headshot that he took mid-air, taking a forearm to the face mask, which knocked him out of the game for a little bit. But he ended up, I guess he was not concussed, fortunately. And he ended up going back in the game for a little bit. I said 17 points from him. Stevenson, 8.5. Hawkinson, 11. Zach Ertz, 8 for 88 and 2 touchdowns this week. 28.8 points from him. Been surprisingly a consistent stud since going to the Arizona Cardinals. Kicker Joseph from Minnesota, he goes for about 8.5, 9 points. And then the Pittsburgh Steelers defense, I believe you actually scored less than what Yahoo says, which is 8. I believe the Steelers' defense score was actually 5, unfortunately. And also, unfortunately, for Hillbillies on PCP, this loss moves him to 3-8, which means your best possible record is going to be 6-8. And I think we can now clap you out from playoff contention. Joining from Gags to Riches, I believe you will stay in 12th place. Perhaps Gags, Josh, the Shawshank Athletics was trying not to fall to 4-7 after this week and be in dire straits for a playoff spot here, but he clobbered Hillbillies on PCP this week, and he is going to move up. He is still going to be under 500 at 5-6, but I believe he will steal the number 6 spot away from the Dub C Hooligans. Let's see, Gags is actually about 100 points ahead of Hillbillies on PCP, which means Hillbillies, you are going to stay in 12th place, trying to fight to avoid that last place and having to wear your powder blue Phillip Rivers jersey at the draft next year. And Shawshank, with this victory, congratulations to you on winning the knockout pool for 2021, which means you can either keep that money or you can roll it over to your next year's dues. Of course, you can, as you probably will do, wait and see if you win any additional money yet at the conclusion of this season. So that is it for week 11. As mentioned, I think I mentioned it last week. They mentioned it a little bit in the podcast. We had a lot of upper teams versus lower teams this week, and unfortunately, all of the upper teams defeated those lower teams, and in the process only created more separation in terms of the playoff chase instead of muddling things up and making the race a little bit more tight. As I mentioned, Disco, Biscuits, Yinzer Jags, and Possum Magic are all going to move to 8-3 after this week. So they are going to have 8 wins. Worst they can do is 8-6. And thanks to the Taupes being now 6-5, all 4 of those teams, with only 3 weeks left in the regular season, are now at least 2 games ahead of everyone else, which means we are basically fighting for the last 2 playoff spots between the Taupes, the Hooligans, Shawshank, Saquon, Ed Lager, and CMC Music Factory. That is 6 teams still fighting for those final 2 playoff spots. Although, again, with matchups going how they are, things are going to be difficult for some of those guys. CMC Music Factory, he is currently, after this week, he is now on a 4-game losing streak, skidding his way. Can he turn it around in the next few weeks and try to get a playoff spot? So yeah, those 4 teams said there's going to be, 3 teams will be 4-7 and trying to turn things around, get back to 500, and maybe, just maybe, by the end of the regular season, be the team, maybe one of the teams who makes that last playoff spot, one of those last 2 playoff spots, perhaps, with a 7-7 record. Although your point totals lead me to be a little bit less than optimistic. All right, I think that is about it for the results here in week 11. I don't think we suffered any significant injuries. Things went pretty smooth. We were back to some big performances, some high-scoring games. Possum and Shawshank and Yinzer Jags will both all be over 200 this week, while Biscuits and Disco were both in the 190s. Springfield Isotopes just below 190. So maybe we are back on the upswing in terms of performances. This week was definitely not as boring as the past few weeks. Gotten a little bit more interesting. Let's take a quick peek at what we've got here. It is Thanksgiving week, heading into week 12, and let's see what we've got in terms of how the playoff race is going to go. But once again, those top 4 teams are 2 games ahead of everyone else. So it's going to be a lot of jockeying for position in terms of trying to claim a bye week between those 4 teams here as we head down the stretch. We've got the Isotopes going up against Disco. Isotopes trying to get win number 7, going up against Disco, who I believe will be trying to remain in first place, although he is going to be going without Patrick Mahomes, Tyreek Hill, anybody else? No Hardman, no Arizona Cardinals defense. You currently have no kicker, so you're going to have to pick somebody up there. Or will you just play the 0? Roll the dice and play the 0. Because once again, you are pretty limited in terms of your overall transactions. Do you want to waste one? Especially considering you are going to need probably a transaction or 2 during the playoffs. So we will see what happens here if you decide to throw in the towel this week. Take a loss. Perhaps take a loss, I should say. But roll the dice and risk a loss in the trade of preserving one of your transactions. We've got Jonathan Taylor, who obviously just had the game of his life last week, going to be going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense. So I feel good about that matchup. 2 good defenses who will be looking to at least contain Taylor. A lot of times after someone has a huge week like that, they tend to come back to earth a little bit. So fingers crossed for the Isotopes this week. No Mahomes, no Tyreek. Things are looking at least a little bit positive going forward in terms of trying to get another victory and get one step closer to a playoff spot for the Isotopes in the hopes of a possible title defense. We've got CMC versus Ed Lager. Both of you 4-7. One of you will be eliminated for sure from playoff contention this week, as you will get loss number 8. So 2 teams at the bottom going head to head. Dub C versus Gags to Riches. Gags looking to put another dagger in the Dub C Hooligans playoff hopes this week, as the Hooligans are going to be going in it without a tight end at all. Hillbillies versus Yinzer Jags. Once again, a podcaster battle. Top versus bottom. Hillbillies, you are already eliminated from playoff contention. You're going to be playing potential spoiler the rest of the way, and perhaps you will be able to upset Yinzer Jags and knock him down a little bit, and maybe prevent him from a bye week coming up. Biscuits versus Shawshank. Huge matchup here, as Shawshank, despite getting back to 5-6 and in playoff spot, has a difficult road ahead through the rest of his regular season. Even though he has the highest point total in the league, he's got to go through, I believe, some of the top teams in the league in these final few weeks. Can Biscuits knock him off, put him back down to 5-7, and make 7-7 the best record he can get, which means if that is the case, the Dub C Hooligans or the Isotopes perhaps more likely the Demise Hooligans, probably the only team that could prevent Shawshank Athletics from making that last playoff spot this year. But he's got a tough matchup. That should be the matchup of the week. Biscuits versus Shawshank, big one there. And then we've got Possum versus Saquon. Possum trying to keep pace with all of the other 8-3s, while Saquon and 8-0 will try to keep his playoff hopes alive and get a victory. If he loses, he will be 4-8, and he will be eliminated from playoff contention. So, some big matchups this week. Said the Taupes trying to get one step closer to a playoff spot, while Disco tries to keep pace with all of the other 8-3s. CMC and Ed Lager, one of you will be eliminated. One of you will live to fight a little bit longer. Dubsy and Gags. Gags will try to knock you down and to take you down with him. Hillbillies versus Yinzers, top versus bottom. Yinzers again, trying to keep pace with those 8-3s. Biscuits also trying to keep pace, but Shawshank coming back strong, trying to knock you down a peg and further secure a playoff spot for himself, while Possum Magic will try to eliminate Saquon at 8-0 to keep pace with the 8-3s and also eliminate Saquon from playoff contention. So this week, a lot of things. I believe this past week in week 11 was a huge factor in terms of the playoff race, perhaps the most significant that we've had so far this year. As once again, as I mentioned, we had a lot of top teams versus bottom teams going against each other, and the top teams defeated all of those lower teams, creating much more separation in terms of the playoff race. And thus, things are not looking like they are not going to be as interesting as we had hoped in the middle there. Those top 4 positions, as predicted many weeks ago, probably occupied, and we are just going to have a couple of teams fighting for those last. Those are the only positions that are going to be interesting to watch is who is able to seal those last 2 playoff spots here as this regular season winds itself down. Once again, a reminder that after this week, I believe the Thursday game next week, a week after Thanksgiving, is the last game in the NFL and in our league that will take place before the trade deadline. So keep that in mind. I believe it is December the 4th. So if you're looking to make any trades, just remember you have approximately from now 10 days or so left to go until the trade deadline. And I think that's it. I think we covered everything. So hopefully Finn, Five-ish, Finkel, Detling, Freddie Freeman, Detling, no. What was the Franz Ferdinand Detling? No. FN2187. Hopefully we have kept it nice and dark and quiet, and we have helped you close your eyes into a long, deep, wonderful slumber, which maybe your dad or your mother will join you with. And we conclude the recap here for week 11. Not sure what the status of the podcast is going to be this week coming up, as once again, it is Thanksgiving this week. Several games on Thursday. As always, I believe it is the Bears at Detroit. Then we have the Raiders at the Cowboys, and then Buffalo at New Orleans on Thursday night. So 3 Thursday games this week. Seattle versus Washington is the Monday night game. Cleveland versus Baltimore, the Sunday night game. So probably not too much fantasy-wise going to be going there on Monday night. if you're starting any Seahawks or Washington football team players, you're probably not having the best of seasons. I'm just going to say that because it is true. And anyway, Cleveland versus Baltimore. Said either pretty much everyone from Baltimore is owned by Ed Lager or Kevin Bean. Although Shawshank does have Mark Andrews, he'll be looking for something there. Cleveland, Chubb for Possum Magic there is probably one of the only relevant players who will be going from them in that matchup. So looks like most likely all of our matchups will not have to go until Monday night. They will be decided by the latest on Sunday night there and here in week 12. All right, I think I've said my piece on pretty much everything for this week. And hopefully, once again, everyone, wishing you a happy Thanksgiving, that you have a wonderful time with your families or whatever it is you do. Be safe, especially for those of you who are local here. If you're coming to the Windber, Johnstown area, COVID is currently raging in the area. A lot of people are getting sick, so be careful. Hopefully, no one in my family, I think a lot of them have already had it, so hopefully no one is bringing it. Probably going to be a little bit extra careful, even though I am vaccinated, have yet to get it's been since March, so I'm a little bit concerned. Probably need to get a booster shot here sometime in the very near future. So that's a little bit of a concern, but anyway, be safe out there as the problem has yet to go away. Don't get anybody else sick. Don't cause anybody else to die. And be safe. Enjoy yourselves, but also be safe. And we will see you back. Thank you again for listening, watching, or whatever it is you do. Hopefully the baby's still sleeping. And hopefully everyone's teams meet or exceed expectations this week. No big injuries. And we all come back here with full bellies after the Thanksgiving weekend to see what the results were from week 12 in the NFL and in Tonto's Demise. All right, everyone. Once again, that is it. Thank you for listening, watching, and we will see you back again here next week to see what happened in Tonto's Demise. So, bye-bye.